of the presidents of Mercosur. It's very important for me because we hadn't been able to do it for many years. It's been the first time in 4 years where the presidents of Mercosur are meeting in person. All of us are meeting in person. It's the second time I have to complete a PTP. The first one was during the pandemic, and everything was much more complex. But this time, we were able to propose many more things. So these are 6 months that have been very active for Mercosur, and we finish in a very lively way. When you analyze how Mercosur's trade worked, we realize how lively this space is and the possibilities it has for the development of the region. I am convinced that the world is changing and that after the pandemic and after the crises that we've had during the pandemic and also the war because of the invasion of Russia and Ukraine, all these elements changed the geopolitical scenario, and the globalization that we used to know is no longer here in the terms that we knew. Nowadays, globalization is something different. It's a globalization that revisits itself. And what at the time was relocalization of companies is now called delocalization of companies. And the large investors of the world go to their places of origin to find the development of their companies and their peoples. I was talking about how lively this trade has been in Mercosur. More than $750 billion we had for trade balance between Mercosur and the rest of the world. And we also moved forward in the internal market. Brazil, for us, for example, is our main trade partner. And therefore, the joint work with them is very, very important, in my opinion. I think there's also something that doesn't go unnoticed for me, and that is the satisfaction that I feel by handing over the presidency to my dear friend Lula, the president of the Federative Republic of Brazil. He's someone I respect, admire, I feel affection for, someone who's very important for the region because of its leadership and its history, and someone who, like me, believes that regional unity is the path to be able to reach the development that our countries need. I'm very joyful. Lula hasn't been a PTP of Mercosur for, 13 years. I think the last time was 2010. And therefore, giving this mandate to him again is a vindication of the region for everything that he had to go through. Persecution, injustice that he was a victim of, something that the Brazilian people already vindicated with their votes. But now the region, in a way, ends up vindicating Lula for the dark times that he had to experience by giving him this PTP for the 6 months that are coming. So this is what I had to say. I know that you have some questions for me, so I open for questions now.
F agency. The English booth cannot hear the questions. Well, Uruguay has a viewpoint that they've sustained for the past few years. President Lacalle Pou, who insists on the idea of partners of Mercosur can negotiate autonomously and expresses their difference by not signing the statement, the decision, but it's a decision that we've already known. It's now turns to Globo TV. I would like to know if the ideas of that agenda of the creation by Lula as president well, there are two issues to consider that I included in my speech. Firstly, the progress with the EU was not delayed by a decision of the countries of Mercosur. It was delayed by internal conflict within the EU. And ultimately, we could sum up by the position of certain countries that are not willing to stop with the agriculture subsidies to their producers. And for Mercosur states are very important to be able to compete and access those markets. Likewise, in this past time, the EU has made decisions in the environmental field, unilateral decisions that change radically the initial purpose of that pre-agreement signed in mid-2019. That change in rules was acknowledged by the EU themselves. I spoke a few days ago with the President of the European Commission, and I spoke also at the Dominican Republic with Josep Borrell, the President of the European Commission for Foreign Affairs. And I spoke about this with many heads of state in Europe. These rules do affect significantly some of the countries that are less industrialized within the Mercosur bloc. There are also rules that we do not share, and President Lula da Silva made reference to, that would prevent giving certain privilege to national governments at the time of making public procurement. And we do not agree, because national procurement is a rule that the states in South America and Argentina especially has always included. Let's wait for the helicopter to go by. So we can make two things very clear. The first one is our willingness to find an agreement with the EU, because we think that in a world that becomes polarized in the trade field between the US and China, with the possibility of building a bridge between Europe and Mercosur, is of great value. And we do want to perfect it. We need for the EU to review certain aspects, certain changes that they introduced unilaterally, environmentally speaking, and certain other matters that I just made reference to, without taking into account other asymmetries that the original agreement made evidence of. The original agreement, I'm being a bit redundant, but there was an origin failure. There was an agreement between two spaces or blocks, and the weakest was the one that would made more concessions. And we reviewed all this throughout this time. President Lula would be in charge of reviewing the last part, but this is the state of affairs in terms of the EU-Mercosur agreement. And I insist, our hope is that we make this real, but in a beneficial way for us. In a society with when one loses and the other one wins, that is not a good society. A good society is one that provides benefits for all. Well, we have to see the European positions as well. They do not depend just on us. In Europe, in 4 years, they did not manage to approve the agreement due to positions of certain countries that want to sustain and support subsidies mechanisms to agriculture producers, just to quote an example. Thank you. So within the concept of liberties, when there's a human rights affair, internal affairs would have to be put aside. And you know what happened with the OAS visit. In this scenario, when talking about the main candidate of the opposition party, and Marina Corina Machado and the internal Venezuela, I'm not going to speak about this. We've always promoted dialogue amongst the Venezuelans as a search for a solution that is definitely needed in Venezuela. The number of people who emigrate from Venezuela gives testimony of the issues in the country, and we need for that dialogue to be back amongst the Venezuelans, for them to have full democracy and to maintain their institutions. In these terms, we heard about the case that you mentioned. Due to the media, we don't have many specific details about it, but we bring this topic about in the negotiation table that we're part of with Venezuela and Mexico, where we bring our debate, and both parties that pretend to find a democratic exit through clean and transparent manners can give their opinions and agree upon these issues. That's what we're doing. We are presenting the issue that we know from the media, really. And unfortunately, many times we put in doubt how partial and non-biased this is. Please don't ask the same question again. Please let me finish. Uruguay is not part of that negotiation table. What I ask of you is to let me finish. And what we want is for this debate to be taken to that debate place, that negotiation table. And that's what we will do. We are interested in a democratic process for Venezuela to be stronger, that transfer is not put into question, that the institutional system works well. We need for the lack of arbitrary prescriptions, and we need an elected council that can put at ease these people. We've been working silently without talking to the media, speaking with the parties involved, and having results that we believe are positive enough. From the time when we voted the report by Bachelet before the UN, we've related ourselves to the Venezuelan problem. We've involved ourselves with the demands on violations against human rights or alleged violations to human rights. We also involved ourselves in the electorate process, and so far it has been developed without major turmoil, and now we face these issues. So we will go to this very same place where we've been working at to see how we can solve it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.